It was a quiet day in the cosmos, the kind of day where everything seems far too peaceful, almost unnervingly so. The stars glowed softly against the velvet blackness, a tranquil backdrop to the universe's quiet hum. On the edge of this vast stillness, the Colossus, a human warship, drifted like a sleeping behemoth, its towering frame barely disturbing the cosmic winds that pulled at it. Inside the ship's bridge, Captain Verity Sykes stared out into the void. The crew moved about with a sense of calm, most of them in their usual stations, reviewing data, adjusting systems, or chatting about trivial matters. After all, they were on a routine patrol along the outer rim of the galaxy. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. The captain adjusted her seat and glanced over to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Lars Harlan, who was hunched over a console, grumbling under his breath. "Something's off," Harlan muttered, not looking up. Verity arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Harlan pointed at a blinking light on the sensor panel, something that had been inactive for the past few months. "That. The communication beacon. It shouldn't be sending out a signal." Verity leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. The beacon was a small, forgotten relic from an ancient war, a satellite no one had bothered to maintain for decades. It was near the edge of the known galaxy, where the remnants of old conflicts still lingered like ghostly memories, half forgotten. Normally, the beacon emitted nothing but static. So when it sent out a faint, coded signal, something felt amiss. "Run a diagnostic," Verity ordered. Harlan nodded, his fingers flying over the control panel. The ship's sensors hummed softly, but it was the silence that followed the diagnostic results that made Verity uneasy. "Well, this is new," Harlan said after a moment, his voice filled with disbelief. "The signal, it's from another ship." "A human ship?" Verity stared at him, narrowing her eyes. "Impossible. The closest human ship is over 1,000 light-years away." "I know, but this signal has human signatures," Harlan replied, looking even more baffled. "It's old, Captain. Real old. Decades, maybe centuries." Verity's heart skipped a beat. A signal, sent from a ship, with human signatures. She could feel her pulse quicken. If there was one thing she had learned in her years of service, it was that human ships were not supposed to be lost, especially not for so long. No one left their own behind. Not unless there was something wrong. "Are we sure this is a distress signal?" she asked, voice sharp. "I'm running encryption scans now," Harlan said, his brow furrowing as his fingers flew over the keys. After a few moments, he looked back up, his expression tense. "It's a request for help. It's been looping for over 200 years. Verity stood abruptly, her chair scraping noisily against the metal floor. "You're telling me this human ship, has been out here all this time, alone?" Harlan didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the display as the data continued to pour in. "That's what it looks like. The ship's coordinates, there, in the Lyran expanse." Verity cursed under her breath. The Lyran expanse was a notorious region of space, sparse, dangerous, and filled with anomalies that made it nearly impossible to navigate. It was a graveyard for lost ships, both human and alien. To go in there without the proper resources was tantamount to suicide. "We need to investigate this," Verity said, a determination settling over her. The decision was final. The crew of the Colossus had a duty to the people they served, and if there was a ship in need of help, even one that had been drifting in space for centuries, they would find it. The Colossus lurched into motion as the command was given to adjust the ship's course toward the Lyran expanse. As the vastness of the void stretched before them, Verity's mind raced with possibilities. What had happened to the ship? Was it really a human vessel? And if so, how had it managed to survive this long? Questions spun in her mind like a violent vortex, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger than a simple rescue was unfolding. "Captain," Harlan called again, his voice grave. "There's something else." "What now?" Verity asked, her patience fraying. Harlan's hands hovered over the controls for a moment before he turned to face her fully. "The signal, it's getting stronger. Too strong." Verity's heart skipped again, but this time it wasn't from concern. It was from realization. Are you telling me that the signal was a trap? Harlan hesitated, then nodded. It's possible, Captain. The signal isn't just drawing us in. It's actively pulling us into the expanse. A sinking feeling settled in Verity's stomach. The Lyran expanse had long been a place of legend, talked about in hushed whispers by those who dared venture into it. Some said it was a vast tomb for lost civilizations, others claimed the expanse had a mind of its own, capable of manipulating space and time. There was no telling what awaited them, but the implications were clear: something wanted them there. This is insane, she muttered, her hand gripping the edge of her chair. We need to be prepared for anything. Harlan stood, walking over to the weapons station. I'll prepare the ship for anything, Captain. But if this is a trap, we'll need to outsmart it. Fast. Verity nodded grimly, her mind already turning over the possibilities. Whatever lay ahead, she would be ready. The Colossus was the most powerful warship in the fleet, and the human race had faced worse odds and won. She would not be the one to lead her crew into failure. But the unknown lay ahead, a vast and treacherous darkness, and nothing could prepare them for the truth of what they would discover. All hands, prepare for a shift in course, Verity commanded over the intercom. We're heading into the Lyran expanse. As the ship accelerated toward the heart of the mysterious region, the crew buzzed with a mixture of excitement and fear. For most, this was just another assignment, another mission in the long history of their service. But for Captain Sykes, it was more than that. It was a chance to uncover a long-lost mystery and perhaps bring an end to the questions that had plagued humanity for centuries. But just as the ship began to break through the outer edge of the expanse, something else happened, something that no one aboard the Colossus could have predicted. The stars outside the windows began to shift, warping and twisting like liquid, distorting space around them. The ship shuddered violently, and alarms blared throughout the hull. The once steady hum of the engines turned into a harsh scream of metal against the fabric of the universe itself. And then, with a sickening lurch, the Colossus was no longer in the expanse. It had crossed some unseen boundary, a threshold that no one had realized they were approaching. Captain! Harlan shouted, his voice thick with panic. We're... But before he could finish, the entire ship went black. Everything stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the eerie silence of deep space, and the crew aboard the Colossus was left suspended in that vast, implacable emptiness, unsure of where they had gone, or what was waiting for them. The darkness inside the Colossus was all-encompassing, a dense blackness that seemed to warp the very air they breathed. The sudden absence of sound, of light, was suffocating. For a moment, it felt like they were suspended in an endless void, untethered from reality itself. The hum of the ship's systems, the reassuring click and whir of technology, gone. The usual background noise of their high-tech vessel, a steady reminder that they were still in control, had vanished. Verity Sykes' hand shot out instinctively, slamming against the control panel in front of her. Status report, she barked, her voice steady but edged with growing frustration. Her mind raced with calculations, trying to piece together what had just happened, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. They had entered the Lyran expanse, but now they were somewhere, someone else. A few seconds passed before Harlan's voice crackled through the comm system, distorted but present. Captain, his words were interrupted by static, but Verity could hear the panic beneath them. We've lost all power. The engines, the life support systems, nothing's working. We're adrift. The harsh realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were stranded. In the middle of the unknown. The signal that had led them here had vanished, leaving them with nothing but an empty, hollow ship drifting through the darkness. Verity took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. All hands, brace for impact, she ordered, though she had no idea what they were bracing for. If this was a trap, they could be dealing with an enemy that didn't even need to show its face. The lights flickered back to life, dim but functional. For a brief moment, there was a slight sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The control panel in front of Verity blinked, and a new set of readings began to fill the screen. The readings didn't match anything they had in their databases. Instead of stars, planets, or familiar objects, the system displayed data that made no sense at all: distortions, swirling energy fields, and interwoven geometries that were far beyond human understanding. Verity's knuckles whitened around the edge of the console as she stared at the display. "What the hell is this?" "Captain," Harlan's voice cut in again, even more strained this time. "I think we've entered some kind of dimensional rift. The sensors are reading different physics. This doesn't make sense. Whatever this place is, it's not a part of known space." The crew buzzed around her, scrambling to regain control. But even as they worked, Verity's mind was already ahead of them. She had to think, and she had to think fast. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a malfunction. It was deliberate. They were being toyed with. "Is there any way to reverse course?" she asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "No," Harlan replied. "The engines won't respond. We're completely at the mercy of whatever's out there." Before Verity could reply, a soft, almost imperceptible tremor rippled through the ship. The feeling was subtle, but unmistakable. Something was moving around them. Something massive, unseen, but present. The air seemed to thrum with energy, and the sense of something vast, something ancient, watching them loomed over her like a shadow that stretched beyond the limits of the ship. Then, the stars outside the viewport began to shift. Slowly at first, like ripples on the surface of a pond, but then faster, more erratic. They twisted and contorted, as though reality itself was bending in on itself, warping and distorting in ways that defied all logic. The crew fell silent as they watched in awe and horror. "What is that?" one of the officers whispered, his voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the ship. "Those aren't stars," Harlan said grimly. "That's not even space. This is something else entirely." "Get a full scan on those objects," Verity ordered, trying to keep the edge of panic from creeping into her voice. "We need to know what we're dealing with." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the crackle of interference as the ship's scanners fought against the distortion in space. It felt as though they were at the mercy of something vast and unknowable, with no way of contacting the outside world, or even knowing if there was an outside world anymore. Was this some kind of dimensional anomaly? A black hole? A tear in spacetime? There was no precedent for this. Whatever it was, they were in it now, and there was no turning back. Then, suddenly, the console in front of Verity blared to life with a burst of data: "Scans complete." A map of the surrounding area flickered onto the screen, and at its center, a blinding point of light appeared, a glowing sphere of energy that hummed with an unsettling power. The ship's sensors couldn't even identify it. It wasn't like anything they'd ever encountered. "Captain," Harlan said, his voice tinged with awe, "whatever that thing is, it's huge. And it's pulling us in." Before she could respond, the ship lurched violently. The force was so sudden and intense that it threw the crew against their seats, and Verity gripped the armrests, teeth clenched. The lights flickered again, and the hum of the ship's systems became a low, ominous groan. "We're being pulled in," Harlan shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The gravity, whatever it is, it's too strong. We can't break free." Verity's heart pounded in her chest as the ship groaned under the strain, the pulling force becoming stronger by the second. She had seen the reports of ships being caught in gravitational anomalies before, but this wasn't like anything she'd studied. This felt like they were being drawn towards something ancient, something deliberately waiting for them. "Steady," she barked, though her voice faltered. She had to maintain control. She couldn't let the crew see her doubt. "Plot a course around the anomaly. We need to get out of here, now." But the controls were unresponsive. The ship was no longer in their hands, and as the gravitational pull intensified, they began to lose altitude, spiraling downward toward the glowing sphere. "Captain, we don't have much time," Harlan warned. "If we don't break free soon, we'll be caught in the center. And I don't think anyone's made it out of that before." Verity's mind raced. This wasn't a standard rescue mission anymore. This wasn't even just a malfunction in their systems. This was something far beyond their comprehension. And with each passing moment, it became more and more clear that they were the prey. But they weren't going down without a fight. They had one weapon left: creativity. And humans were damn good at fighting back, no matter the odds. "Prepare the emergency maneuver protocols," she ordered. "We're not getting caught that easily." The crew sprang into action, their faces grim but determined. The Colossus wasn't just any warship. It was a human-made marvel, designed to survive the worst of battles. Verity had led them through worse before, and she would lead them through this, whatever this was. As the gravitational pull increased, and the ship began to spiral toward the heart of the anomaly, Verity's mind was already working through their options. They needed to outthink this. They had no power, no control, but that didn't mean they were powerless. There had to be a way out. There always was. And if it meant bending the laws of physics to their will, well, that was exactly what humans did best. The force pulling the Colossus in was relentless. The hull creaked and groaned under the stress as if it too could feel the invisible hands of gravity tightening around it. Verity Sykes felt her heart race, the weight of command pressing harder with every second that ticked by. The ship was spiraling downward, its nose tilting toward the glowing sphere at the center of the anomaly, and all systems continued to fail. Outside, the stars twisted and contorted into shapes that made no sense, as though they were being dragged into a vortex that defied reason. The ship's instruments were useless, their screens flashing an erratic mess of unreadable data, and the crew's only option was to rely on their instincts, and on each other. "Captain," Harlan's voice crackled over the comm, frantic, "we're at the event horizon. Whatever that thing is, it's pulling us in faster now. We've got minutes, maybe seconds before we hit the core." Verity's knuckles were white as she gripped the armrest. The pull was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was like the very fabric of space itself was being warped, distorted by some force beyond their comprehension. The stars outside the viewport had blurred into streaks of light, and the ship was fighting itself to stay on course, groaning with every twist and turn of its trajectory. There was no getting out of this, not by conventional means, anyway. "Set course for the edge of the distortion," Verity ordered, her voice sharp despite the rising panic in her chest. "We're not going into that thing without a plan. We've got one shot." "But Captain, if we don't," Harlan started, but she cut him off. "I know, Lieutenant. We won't survive if we hit the core, but we won't survive if we don't try either." As the Colossus plunged closer toward the center, Verity surveyed the faces of her crew, each one set in grim determination, but none of them oblivious to the enormity of the task. They had no backup, no reinforcements, and no way to communicate with anyone beyond this pocket of space. No one would be coming to rescue them. "Commander Richards," Verity called, her eyes catching the first officer's. "Can you work with the auxiliary systems? Anything we can use to reverse the ship's trajectory?" Commander Richards, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a quick mind and a dry wit, didn't hesitate. "I'll give it a shot, Captain, but the power's drained. I might be able to reroute some emergency power to the propulsion system, but I need to." Before he could finish, another tremor shook the ship, even harder than before. The lights flickered and dimmed, and the ship's low-thrumming hum became erratic, like a heart struggling to beat. The crew lurched forward in their seats, their bodies pulled downward as the force of gravity intensified. The Colossus groaned and shuddered, as though it were a living thing caught in a death grip. "Hold on!" Verity shouted, grabbing the armrest once again to steady herself. Her fingers dug into the cold metal, but she felt the ship's structure straining under the pressure. "We need to move, now!" The emergency lights bathed the room in red, casting long shadows across the bridge. A harsh, mechanical sound followed as the ship's auxiliary power systems flickered to life, lights dimming slightly as emergency conduits began to hum with life. Richards worked furiously at his station, his fingers moving with precision. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he adjusted the ship's circuits, rerouting what little power they had left to the critical systems. "We've got partial thrust," Richards said breathlessly. "It's not much, but it's enough to keep us from being sucked in completely. Good, Verity replied, relief flooding through her. It was a start, but they still had a long way to go. A sense of urgency pulsed through the bridge, a shared understanding that this wasn't just about surviving the immediate crisis, it was about figuring out a way to escape, or better yet, outwit whatever force had brought them here in the first place. The glowing sphere ahead was massive, its core pulsating with unnatural energy. Verity could feel the pull intensifying by the second, as though the very fabric of the universe was trying to tear them apart. Get me a visual on the core, Verity ordered. She needed to understand what they were dealing with. Harlan, working at the sensor panel, let out a small, strangled gasp as the readout filled the screen. Captain. I think I understand now. The core, it's not a black hole. It's something else. It's a gateway. A gateway? Verity repeated, her brow furrowing. A dimensional rift, Harlan said, his voice still tinged with disbelief. It's not pulling us into a singularity. It's pulling us toward something. I don't know what exactly, but this is a doorway. A portal to another place. Another universe, maybe. Verity's thoughts raced. A gateway. A portal. The idea struck her like a revelation. It was the only explanation that made sense. This wasn't just a natural anomaly, it was some kind of engineered device. A dimensional tear, a door between worlds. And they were on the verge of crossing through it. What's on the other side? Verity asked, her voice low. Harlan shook his head. I can't say for sure. But based on the readings, it's not just a passage. It's alive. It's conscious. A chill ran down Verity's spine. Something conscious? Something alive? Are you saying this thing is sentient? She asked, trying to wrap her mind around the idea. I don't know, Captain. But the energy signatures, there's a pattern to them. It's almost like it's communicating. Communicating? Richards asked incredulously, glancing up from his station. With us? Not with us, Harlan corrected. With the ship. It's like it's trying to connect with us. And it's manipulating the ship's systems. The signal, it's coming from that core. It's not just pulling us in. It's pulling us apart, trying to disassemble our very reality. Verity's heart skipped. Everything they had been experiencing, the strange gravity, the distorted stars, the loss of control, it wasn't random. The core was alive, aware, and actively warping the space around them, manipulating them like ants under a magnifying glass. She knew they didn't have much time. Richards, we need to come up with something, and fast. We can't let that thing disassemble us. Richards's brow furrowed as he worked the console, his mind clearly racing. Then, a sudden, wild thought crossed his face. Wait a minute, he muttered, tapping at the screen. I might have something. If that core's manipulating the ship's systems, then maybe we can disrupt its influence. There's a way to scramble its signal, disrupt the energy flow. But it's a long shot. It could blow the ship apart in the process. Verity hesitated, her mind weighing the possibilities. They could keep trying to fight against the gravitational pull. They could keep steering toward the edge of the distortion, but the core would only get stronger. If they didn't act quickly, they would be pulled in completely, and whatever awaited them on the other side would be beyond comprehension. On the other hand, Richards's plan could give them a chance, if they survived the attempt. It was risky. It was insane. But it was all they had left. Do it, she commanded, her voice steady with resolve. We're not going down without a fight. Richards hesitated for only a second, then he slammed his hand down on the controls. The ship lurched violently, groaning in protest, as the auxiliary systems were pushed to their limits. The Colossus shuddered, its bulk straining against the gravity as it accelerated toward the core. And then, with a deafening crash that rattled the ship's bones, the power surged through the ship in a blinding flash of light. Everything went white. The universe itself seemed to split apart, and for one fleeting moment, Verity thought they might be lost to it forever. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the ship was free. They had broken through. The core, alive, sentient, and powerful, was no longer pulling at them. It was gone. And they were left, battered and bruised, floating in the stillness of space once more. But this time, it was different. They had made it through. Together. The Colossus hung in the void like a wounded creature, drifting quietly in the aftermath of the tumultuous battle it had just fought with the forces of the strange anomaly. The lights on the bridge were dim, but functional, flickering slightly from the power surge that had nearly torn the ship apart. The once pristine hull now showed signs of wear, deep dents and scorched patches, evidence of the violent battle with the unknown force. The ship was still alive. They were still alive. Verity Sykes stood before the viewport, staring into the endless expanse of stars. The blackness outside had returned to something familiar, something comforting. They were back in normal space. Or what passed for normal, at least. The Lyran expanse, that strange pocket of reality, was behind them now, a distant memory of chaos. The glow of the dimensional core, that pulsating, living thing, had vanished. But the echoes of it lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder of how close they had come to being consumed by something far beyond human understanding. "We made it," Verity murmured, almost to herself. Against all odds, Harlan's voice came from behind her, his tone carrying a note of disbelief. He had seen his fair share of dangerous situations, but this one? This was something entirely different. Verity turned toward him, her expression unreadable. The strain of the past hours was etched into every line of her face, but there was a flicker of something else there, pride, maybe. Or perhaps something deeper. Survival. Humanity's unyielding resilience. She nodded, meeting his gaze. "Yes, we did." Harlan stood next to her, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the control panel. "The core," he said, still trying to wrap his mind around the idea. "It was alive, Captain. That wasn't just some anomaly. It was a sentient entity. And it was trying to manipulate us, pull us apart." Verity glanced back at the view screen, where the stars now hung in a perfectly still and silent sky. "I know. And I don't think we've seen the last of it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The encounter had left them all shaken, but it had also made something else abundantly clear. There were forces in the universe far beyond the reach of their technology, beyond their understanding. But there was one thing they did know with certainty: they were human. And that had been enough to see them through. Richards's voice cut through her reverie. "Captain, the systems are holding steady. We've stabilized the ship. But I'm not sure how long the damage will last. We've got structural issues, and the engines are operating at a fraction of their capacity. We're going to need repairs." Verity's eyes narrowed. "Understood. Get on it. We need to be ready for anything. That anomaly might have been just one thread in a much bigger tapestry." "We'll be ready," Richards replied, a hint of determination in his voice. Verity took one last look out the viewport. "And we're not leaving this area until we know exactly what happened. There are questions here, too many unanswered questions. And I intend to find the answers." The crew was already moving, clicking into action as Richards relayed orders to the engineers. They had been through hell, and they had come out the other side, battered but unbroken. And Verity, despite the overwhelming exhaustion weighing her down, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But even as the crew worked to restore order, Verity knew that this victory, hard-won though it was temporary. They had escaped the immediate danger, yes. But whatever had created the anomaly, whatever intelligence had been behind it, was still out there. The truth was, they had no idea what they were dealing with. "Report on our location," Verity said, turning to Harlan, who was running diagnostics. "We're still within the Lyran expanse," Harlan replied. "We're far from the center now, but the region is still unstable. I'd recommend getting out of here as soon as possible, Captain. There's no telling what else is hiding in this area." Verity nodded, her mind already turning over the next steps. There was no reason to stay here, no reason to tempt fate. And yet, set a course for the nearest starbase. We need to make contact with command and report in, she said. But keep sensors on full alert. Whatever that entity was, we can't assume it's the only one of its kind. And if there's more out there, we need to be prepared. Harlan acknowledged the order, and the crew continued their work in quiet determination. A soft beep interrupted the comm. It was the communication system. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Luce from communications. "I've got a signal coming in. It's strange. It's not a normal transmission. I'm getting interference, but it's definitely a message." Verity's pulse quickened. "A message? From where?" She moved swiftly toward the comm station. "Can you decode it?" "I'm trying, Captain," Luce replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. "But whatever it is, it's like it's coming from within the fabric of space itself. The signal's encrypted in ways I've never seen before." Verity felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "Do we have a lock on the source?" Luce hesitated for a moment. I can't tell, Captain. But it's coming from the same direction we were pulled from." Verity's mind raced. That gateway, that living core, they had left it behind. Or so they thought. Was it reaching out to them? Or was there something else? Something worse? "Open the channel," Verity commanded, a chill settling in her bones. "Let's hear it." The screen flickered to life. The distorted signal cleared momentarily, revealing a strange, shifting pattern of light and sound, an unintelligible jumble of frequencies. Then, amidst the static, a voice, low and foreign, reverberating through the speakers. "Humanity has arrived." The message was brief, cryptic, and it struck Verity like a thunderclap. Her pulse quickened, her mind working in overdrive. Humanity has arrived. The words echoed in her mind, the implications settling over her like a heavy cloak. Who, or what, had left them this message? The portal wasn't just a random anomaly. It was a gateway. A doorway to something far greater, and now, apparently, someone, or something, had taken notice of their presence. For the briefest moment, fear flickered in Verity's chest. But she quickly tamped it down. She was a leader. And no matter what came next, they would face it head-on, together. They had survived this far. They would survive whatever was coming next. "We need to analyze the full transmission," she said, her voice steady. "Prepare for whatever comes next. We're not going to let anyone, or anything, decide our fate for us." Her words rang with resolve, and the crew, despite their exhaustion and fear, rallied behind her. Humanity had been through the darkest of times before, and they had always found a way to survive. This would be no different. As the Colossus drifted farther from the heart of the anomaly, and the stars began to return to their steady, familiar rhythms, Verity knew one thing for certain: the story was far from over. They were no longer just explorers, pioneers, or survivors. They were something else now. Something that had caught the attention of forces greater than themselves. And whatever came next, they would face it on their terms. Onward, Verity whispered to herself, a quiet, unspoken promise to her crew, to humanity, to everything they had fought for. The journey was only just beginning.